In this video, Write Better Memoir Dialogue, 7 Pillars Proven and Easy to Do, I'm not only going to show you why memoir is important, of course, you know that, but I'm also going to show you some best writing practices to make your dialogue memorable and meaningful. You will review, or perhaps you'll learn, either way is great, some proven techniques to write memoir dialogue well. So keep viewing until the end to get all 7 proven pillars for you to add to your writing toolbox. While dialogue is an interesting and essential part of an effective memoir, how much should you include and when should you include it? One thing you don't want is for your dialogue to slip into conversational blah, blah, blah. Ooh, ouch. After assimilating the contents of this video, you'll have 7 easy, proven techniques to create much better dialogue. First off, I'll offer you some reasons to include dialogue in your writing. These whys are also pillars, and then I'll provide some actionable tips for creating interesting memoir speech that moves your story along. I'm Denis Ledoux, the founder of the Memoir Network, where writers who are committed to writing memorable and meaningful memoir turn for help. We've helped thousands of writers, and we can help you too. Okay, let's get back to our subject. Dialogue performs several functions in making your story interesting and meaningful. Every memoir ought to contain carefully crafted dialogue. Here are some reasons for including dialogue in your memoir and how to do so that it is meaningful and well done. Pillar number 1. Memoir conversation allows the reader to hear the character speak for himself or herself. If your characters had some defense, for instance, of a behavior of theirs, you can include it here in your memoir. "I know it didn't look good for me," my cousin Victor said in his brash voice, "but it wasn't me who did it." Dialogue is an opportunity also to use regionalisms and particularities of speech. "Ain't much wrong with it," my grandfather would say when he was pleased with something. You can even write in the pauses if that was typical of the person. After asking my grandmother a question, I could often hear the faucet dripping or a dog barking outside. I don't know if she was thinking of her answer or if she was just savoring how astute I was in asking such a question. As I grew older, I learned it was perhaps not the brilliance of my inquiry that had silenced her, but her own process, and I learned to let there be space in our conversation for her to answer. Remember to implement this hear the character technique whenever you are writing a memoir dialogue. Pillar number 2. When you write a dialogue well, you show rather than tell. Show and not tell is a pillar of all good writing. It permits the writer to put what might otherwise be tell elements into the voice of the character rather than into that of the author. These elements thus become show. When the author presents info, however, it is tell. It's not always bad for the writer to tell information that is important for the reader to know. In fact, I have a video on this channel on that very topic. Let's hear one of your characters. "I've always been an immature person," John said as he was assessing the disaster of his precipitous actions. Now compare the previous line with the following. John was an immature person, a really big baby. Well, in the first statement, a piece of dialogue in which John speaks, we understand that John is speaking for himself, and his assessment is probably right. In the second statement, we cannot be sure that the author who is saying John is an immature person is not really out to engage in a vendetta against John. Letting a character speak for himself or herself is a great way to provide the reader with an insight the reader can accept. That's why you should use dialogue. Otherwise, the reader may feel the author is trying to entice the reader to his side, the author's side, against John. Of course, you have to use dialogue that you heard, either verbatim or in a reasonable reconstruction, or perhaps dialogue that you have drawn from a letter or a journal. You cannot make things up just to ease your writing task. This is pillar number 2. Now, let's move on to pillar number 3. 3. Learning to write dialogue well permits you to impart immediacy to the story. Your memoir acquires a "you are there" quality. Let's hear this. "Look at me," she said. "Look at these hands." Well, with these words, aren't we drawn to look at her hands, if only in our mind? Pillar number 3 will place the reader in the time frame of your story. Now, I have given you 3 great reasons to include dialogue and some steps to implement them. Let me spend a few moments now providing you with 4 more techniques that will serve you well. Pillar number 4. Keep memoir conversation short. Well, not all the time, but a lot of the time. It's harder to mess up short dialogue than it is to mess up long dialogue, which gives you many opportunities to fall into foolishness. At least the mess up in the memoir conversation is short when your dialogue is short, and it's easier for the reader to forgive. Keep explanations for the narrative. The author controls the narrative. Here's an example of terrible life story dialogue. "This is my cousin Elizabeth," she replied, "whose father once had a hardware store on the corner of Huntington and Blake, and whose business won best in the state 3 times in a row, but who finally got sick of hardware and turned to accounting." Now let's listen to a better dialogue, a short dialogue, which is followed by an accompanying narrative. This is what I hope that you will do in your memoir. "This is my cousin Elizabeth," she replied. There's the short dialogue. Now for the narrative. "Eventually, we learned that Elizabeth's father once had a hardware store on the corner of Huntington and Blake. His business had won best in the state 3 times in a row, but he finally got sick of hardware and turned to accounting." "He's so much happier now," added Elizabeth. Isn't this so much easier to read? In pillar number 4, we see that words can almost be the same, but they are not equally weighed down with the implausibility of a wordy monopoly of a conversation. Let's go on to pillar number 5. Insert feeling and emotion in the memoir dialogue. Again, keep analysis or interpretation for the narrative. "I resent you," he snarled. He had been putting up with his brother for a long time, and now that he was no longer living at home, he let his anger fly. Now, we could have written, "I resent you. I have been putting up with you for a long time, and now that I am no longer living at home, I will let my anger fly." In pillar number 5, you can hear how more heavy the second example, in which all of the facts are included in the dialogue. You can hear how this sounds to the reader's ears. It's really rather awkward and stilted. We much prefer to have the facts in the narrative. Let's go on to pillar number 6. Do not replicate most memoir dialogues from real life into your story. It is not interesting dialogue. Unfortunately, real life is not as interesting as your memoir must be. Next time you are in a public space, listen to the dialogue around you. You will easily notice how repetitive, aimless, and meaningless so much of it is. Much of it is just filling the air. Life story dialogue has to move your memoir along. It cannot be a filler. It cannot be used because, well, that's really what was said. In the first example below, the dialogue doesn't move the story along. It's simply imitative of real life and is absolutely true. But it's so boring. Why include something like that in your story? Then I will go to a second example, and in it we will have a glimpse of the character's life. And so this bit of dialogue, which threatens to be close to real life, actually moves the story along. Here first is the terrible dialogue that imitates life. This dialogue we have all, you, me, everyone listening to this, indulged in ourselves and have heard. The waitress asked, "What will you ladies have today?" What's the special?" I asked. "Halibut," said the waitress. "Halibut. Oh, I had halibut at my daughter's the other day. No. I want something else." That is the conversation that actually took place. How interesting is that? How many times can you repeat that inside your memoir? Or something like that. Now, here's some better dialogue because it's more interesting dialogue. It contains some psychological component that the previous example did not. "What will you ladies have today?" the waitress asked Teresa and me. "What's the special?" I asked. "Halibut." Halibut. For a moment, I was taken away by a feeling that I could not describe, but then it came to me. I had ordered halibut the day Tom had taken me out to lunch to tell me he was divorcing me. Well, of course you've noticed that in the second example, the memoir character, the author, uses a banal exchange to share a huge leap into the psychological realm. Because of this dialogue, we can take a jump into the character, what has happened to the character. In this case, it's a bit of backstory that we need to understand what is happening. Now, let's go from pillar 6 to pillar 7. Skip the dialogue if it doesn't add anything. Yes, dialogue can give voice to a character, but let's not make that voice boring or unnecessary. In the restaurant scene above, it would be preferable to skip the dialogue with the waitress and just move on to what happened between you and Teresa that day. If nothing happened, skip the restaurant scene altogether. Who needs it? Dialogue, as every part of your memoir, must serve the theme of your writing, what you're trying to say inside your memoir. If it doesn't do so, excise it, cut it out. As they say, kill your little darling. Which technique did you appreciate in today's video that you think you will use in your own writing? Before I ask you my final question, I want to make sure to ask you to subscribe to this channel. If you benefited from it, why not click on the subscribe button below? And if you want exclusive writing guidance that I share with my newsletter subscribers, click on the link in the description to this video. It will bring you right to a subscription form. Join the thousands of writers who have written better memoir, thanks to all they have received in the newsletter and on the site. It's all free. Now on to a question for you, a particular question. Tell me, please, and tell me and the other viewers, which one of these techniques are you going to implement first? Is it making your dialogue shorter, or is it making sure your dialogue doesn't only reproduce actual speech? Or is it something else altogether? Oh, and before you go, I want to be sure to tell you I offer viewers a complimentary get-to-know-you coaching or editing session. And be sure not to miss any of the learning videos on this channel. Good luck writing the dialogue of your stories.